The Wine Spectator recently came out with its list of top 100 wines for 2022. In last week's video, I discussed some of my favorites and provided some recommendations for wine collectors. But after giving it some more thought, it occurred to me that there were a number of wines that were outstanding and probably more highly regarded than those that were on the list, or which offered better value than the wines that were on the list, but simply were not included. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing 12 of the most glaring omissions from the Wine Spectator Top 100, and I'm also going to mention a couple that I think should not have been included at all. We're going to get right into it, but in the meantime, if there's a wine that you think should have been included in the Wine Spectator Top 100 but was not, please let me know in the comments below. The first glaring omission from the Wine Spectator Top 100 is the 2019 Chateau Tour Saint Christophe, which is from Saint-Emilion on Bordeaux's right bank. This highly acclaimed wine received scores that include 96, 95, and 94-point ratings, and sells for only about $40 in the US and even less than that in Europe. So it really offers tremendous quality for the price. As a right bank wine, this wine is Merlot dominant, yet includes a substantial Cabernet Franc percentage, typically about 20% or so. There were some new owners that acquired this property in 2012, and they immediately got to work and reinvigorated the vineyards. These investments have paid off handsomely, as the 2018 through 2020 vintages are all outstanding and definitely some of the best wines that this producer has ever made. The vineyards have ideal south and southwest exposure and excellent natural drainage, which helps to avoid fungal disease in times of heavy rain, which is always useful in Bordeaux. This is definitely one to load up on now while you can and before prices start heading north. Also note that even though I appreciated the Talbot and Beau Séjour Bécourt recommendations from Wine Spectator, this wine offers comparable quality in terms of ratings and yet sells for about half the price of those wines. The next most glaring omission by the Wine Spectator when preparing its top 100 list is the 2010 Lopez de Heredia Vina Tondonia Rioja Reserva. This exceptional wine from a legendary producer received scores that include 97 points and two 96-point scores, and even in the United States it sells for only $48. This 2010 vintage is actually the current release, as this iconic producer ages their wine for much longer than most before they release it. This wine is a Tempranillo dominant blend, but also includes Garnacha, Graciano, and Mizuelo. While Lopez Heredia has several different bottlings, the Vina Tondonia is their most prestigious vineyard and my personal favorite. The Grande Reserva is extremely hard to come by, but they produce about 220,000 bottles or so of the Vina Tondonia Reserva. So this is definitely one that you should be able to locate without any difficulty. I've been drinking this one a lot this past few months, and so I probably need to restock so I don't run through my stash too quickly, as it is very age-worthy as well. This is an absolutely stunning wine that's highly acclaimed and from a legendary producer, so it's an absolute no-brainer at this price point. The Diatom Chardonnay from Santa Barbara County is the next most glaring omission by the Wine Spectator. This incredible wine received scores of 96 points and 95 points and sells for only $25 a bottle. But rather than include this outstanding wine in their list, Wine Spectator chose to include the Chardonnay that received 90 points from football player Charles Woodson. This Diatom Chardonnay, in contrast, is made by longtime winemaker Greg Brewer, who's been the winemaker for Brewer Clifton for many years. Brewer Clifton is also an excellent producer and one that you should consider if you're looking for wines from Santa Barbara County. But what happened was in 2020, due to the uncertainties surrounding COVID and the financial impact of COVID, Brewer Clifton did not produce nearly as much Chardonnay as they usually do. As a result, Greg Brewer stepped in and purchased some of that top-notch fruit and used it to make this outstanding wine. This wine offers incredible value at this price point and features vibrant acidity and pronounced flavors that include citrus and wet stone, and also features outstanding complexity and texture. This wine is an absolutely shocking value at this price point and one that I cannot recommend highly enough. The 2019 Clos de Papes is the next glaring omission by Wine Spectator. This exceptional wine received two 98-point scores and two 97-point scores, including one from Wine Spectator. It sells for around $100 a bottle and offers exceptional quality, yet was nowhere to be found on the Wine Spectator Top 100. This is one of my favorite producers in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and it's one that I typically seek out every vintage, so definitely look for other vintages as well. In 2019, there were drought conditions in the southern Rhone, but yet this producer did a fairly good job of making a relatively elegant wine despite those trying conditions. This one comes in at ABV that's around 14.5%, which is a touch lighter than many producers in Chateau that vintage. This wine is a blend that includes 65% Grenache, 20% Mourvèdre, 10% Syrah, and 5% of other permitted varietals. This wine is already stunning, but it will definitely continue to improve and get better with some bottle age. So if you purchase it, I might drink one of them in the near term and then put the rest away for a few years or so. The Gosset Grand Reserve Brut Champagne is the next most glaring omission by the Wine Spectator when preparing its top 100 wines of 2022. This exceptional champagne received a 93-point score from the Wine Spectator and sells for around $45 or so in the US, even less in Europe. This historic producer dates way back to 1584. One of the things I like about this producer is that they don't use malolactic fermentation in their champagnes. As a result, there's refreshing acidity, which I appreciate very much. Another great thing about this producer's production is that they give extended lees aging even to their non-vintage wines. So this wine, for example, received 4 to 5 years of extended lees aging. This extended lees aging adds additional complexity to the champagne and some texture, as well as some autolytic descriptors that I really appreciate, such as brioche, toasted nuts, and so forth. The exceptional 2015 vintage is the base for this wine and includes 80 to 90% of the fruit, with the remainder coming from 2013 and 2014. This wine is a blend of 45% Pinot Noir, 45% Chardonnay, and 10% Meunier. It's definitely one that I recommend and one that I think should have been included in the Wine Spectator Top 100. At the lower price points, Wine Spectator overlooked the impressive 2019 Ben Marco Malbec, which sells for only $14, despite the fact that it received ratings that include 93, 92, and 91 points. This wine comes from the Uco Valley in Argentina. This wine aged for 11 months in neutral oak. This wine features an impressive ripe fruit profile, yet it's well balanced and refreshing. This is an absolute no-brainer for $14 a bottle. One general weakness of the Wine Spectator list this year, in my opinion, was Nebbiolo-based wines and wines from Piedmont, which I thought were somewhat underwhelming. For example, I think it was a mistake for Wine Spectator not to include the 2018 Produttori del Barbaresco on this list. This wine sells for about $40 in the US and 25 euros in Europe, and it received multiple 93-point scores. Even though this is a cooperative, it's a quality-minded one. This producer ensures high-quality fruit from its 50 members by requiring them to provide 100% of the fruit every vintage to the cooperative. In other words, they can't keep their best fruit to bottle and sell themselves. And they're also paying these members for their fruit on an annual basis based on quality, and that quality determination gets revisited every single vintage. Collectively, these 50 members control about 1/3 of the vineyards in Barbaresco, and they have some exceptional sites, including some Acili vines. The 2018 vintage of Produttori del Barbaresco was a bit of a warmer vintage, and so this one is a little bit more approachable and fruit-forward. It's one that you can enjoy early with food and a healthy decant. It'll probably age about 10 years or so, but it's not going to be the longest lived of the Produttori del Barbarescos, and I certainly would not hold it for as long as I would stellar vintages like 2016. Nevertheless, it is a very impressive wine and one that I think should have been on the Wine Spectator Top 100. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. In my opinion, it was also a mistake for the Wine Spectator not to include a world-class Chardonnay on its list that received 2 98-point ratings and which sells for around $119 a bottle. Specifically, I'm talking about the 2019 Leeuwin Art Series Chardonnay. Leeuwin is a world-class producer of Chardonnay and has been for many years. This exceptional wine comes from the Margaret River area in Western Australia. 2019 was a bit of a cooler vintage, and so this wine is characterized by elegance and finesse. This wine definitely benefits from additional time in the bottle and doesn't typically peak until at least 5 years after the vintage. So you'll definitely want to try to exercise some patience, or perhaps purchase an extra bottle to enjoy right away, and then try to save the remainder of them for a few years. For example, I enjoyed the 2009 vintage of Leeuwin Art Series Chardonnay at a restaurant a few years ago, and it was still showing incredibly well with lots and lots of complexity. So you'll definitely be rewarded if you choose to exercise patience and let these bottles age. The 2019 Marchesi Frescobaldi Castello Nipozzano, Vecchie Viti, Chianti Rafina Reserva DOCG sells for only €13 in Europe and about $20 in the United States. This wine received a 92-point score and is one that I think should have been included in the Wine Spectator Top 100. Chianti Classico was great, and I'm a big fan of that as well. However, prices have been trending upward the past few years. Chianti Rafina, however, is still a little bit under the radar and offers better value at this time, in my opinion. In addition, I also appreciate Chianti Rafina because the wines tend to be a little bit more elegant and have a little bit more finesse than some of the Chianti Classico wines. For example, this wine comes from vineyards that are located at 400 meters above sea level, and there's a high diurnal range, which means that it cools off a lot at night. This helps to preserve refreshing acidity in the wines that I really appreciate very much. Dominus has long been one of my favorite producers in Napa Valley. Unfortunately, the prices for their top wine now eclipse $300 a bottle. Fortunately, however, Dominus also makes an excellent wine at the $90 price point. This wine is a Bordeaux blend that's called Napa Nook. Napa Nook is 87% Cabernet Sauvignon, 8% Petit Verdot, and 5% Cabernet Franc. Napa Nook has a high pedigree as this wine comes from fruit that is sourced in the famous Napa Nook vineyard in Yountville. However, the producer selects blocks that are specifically designed to have soft tannins and lively fruit and be enjoyable for early consumption. The 2019 Napa Nook was highly acclaimed and received scores that include 96 points, 94 points, and 93 points. This is definitely an outstanding wine and a compelling value for Napa Valley. Riesling does not receive 100-point scores very often, and so I think it was a mistake for the Wine Spectator not to include the 2019 Knoll Schutt-Schmaragd Riesling from the Vaha region of Austria in its Wine Spectator Top 100 list. This impressive wine from the 2019 vintage received a 100-point score and a 97-point score. It can be purchased for around $95 in the US. Knoll is one of the top producers in the Vaha and has been for many years. This is a dry Riesling and one that features impressive minerality with stone fruit and abundant acidity. There's a long, complex finish, and this is just an incredibly impressive wine, and definitely one that Riesling lovers will want to stock up on. In my view, one of the biggest mistakes Wine Spectator made was not including the impressive Chateau Larocque in its top wine list for this past year. Chateau Larocque is an impressive producer from Saint-Emilion on Bordeaux's right bank. This wine is 97% Merlot and 3% Cabernet Franc. Despite the fact that it received multiple 95-point scores and a 94-point score, and thus received ratings that compare favorably to both Talbot and Beau Séjour Bécot, both of which were in the top 11 from Wine Spectator, this wine was nowhere to be found on Wine Spectator's Top 100 list. This wine also sells for an incredibly reasonable $35 a bottle, which is far lower than those other two wines as well. This producer has a very strict selection and uses only 40% of the fruit for this top wine. The best vineyards for this producer are located near Troplong-Mondot. This is a wine that is enjoyable young, however it would be better with 5 to 7 years in the bottle, and it will age up to 2 decades. This is a producer that's largely flown under the radar because they have not sold en primeur and because until recently the wines were only available in France. But now that they're more widely available and distributed broadly, you can better believe that the reputation will be getting around quickly and that the prices for this wine will be heading north in the not too distant future. So it's definitely one that we should stock up on and take advantage of while we can.